Awesome. Well, welcome to Downtown Faith, especially if it is your first time. I just want to say how grateful we are that you're here and participating with us today in our discussion series. We call them discussion series because it's not just going to be me that's talking today. We open it up at the tables for discussion, and so we are on our fourth and final stage of this discussion. We've been walking through a letter that was found in the New Testament with this guy Paul, who would go around and he would start these churches, and then he would write these letters back to these churches and send them reminders, send them updates, thank them for maybe gifts that they sent to him that were keeping him going as he was a missionary to all these other places. And we just thought we're going to look through these 4 chapters in Philippians. It's kind of a small letter, but it says a lot. And one of the things that it talks about a lot is joy. And so, as we've gone through these last few weeks, we talked about that true joy develops from sacrifice and leads to new life. Paul talked about how he was giving of his life so that people could come to know Jesus and follow Jesus, and that this was actually a very hard thing. This was a very sacrificial thing. He was actually writing this letter from prison to these churches because the empire, the powers that be, didn't necessarily like this movement of what was going on, of which he was a part of. And he was saying that he wants to sacrifice so that new life could happen, not just in him, but in others. And we talked about last week, he said, Richard Rohr in his book, Falling Upward, says, in legends and literature, sacrifice of something to achieve something else is almost always the pattern. Sacrifice is almost always the pattern. And so that's really what we've been looking at as we look into these letters. And we said that a sacrificial life is best enjoyed with others living sacrificially. That we want to give of ourselves, but not by ourselves, right? It's better when we're with people, especially when we're giving of ourselves for people, because we understand that if we're doing this together, we are stronger and we are better together. And then last week we said the joy of experiencing a new life begins with sacrificing an old one. Right? So I sacrifice who I am now so that I can be who I am becoming. Right? I give up who I am so I can be who I am becoming. And we talked about our identities. And from what I heard, the conversations at the tables got real deep last week about identities. And the things that we see ourselves as, that maybe even build some pride in our life. And the idea that we may have to give that up to be this new thing, this next thing, this better thing, this thing that is more of who we really are and more of our true selves. And then Paul's going to talk about it. He's like, listen, I'm not there yet, is what he kind of tells the people in his letter in chapter 3. And then we move into chapter 4, and he kind of talks about this disagreement that's happening between two of the ladies in the church there. And he's like, hey, listen, let's make amends. Let's agree on this, and kind of helps them kind of through that and shares his heart on that. And then he goes into something that I think is incredibly important. And he's going to talk about their thoughts, their thought life, their mind. Because if we think about it, thoughts leads to attitudes, which leads to actions. Right? Thoughts lead to attitudes that lead to actions. You can say it this way: my thoughts about something or someone will generate an attitude towards that thing or person, and I will act accordingly. Right? Think about your thoughts. Isn't that interesting? Just that concept alone, by the way, that we can think about our thoughts and what they're doing to us. Think about the information that you're taking in all the time. And I would say that we are in an information age, and technology has allowed more information at our fingertips than ever before. Someone told me that when we were getting ready to start the church down here. And someone who really disagrees with religion, religious things, was like, you can't sit there and lie to people anymore from the front of the church because they have the information at their fingertips. And it's like, yeah, that's true. Not that I was trying to lie before, but yeah, that's true. You have information at your fingertips like never before. And so one of the things that I think he goes into here that is even more applicable to us in our day and age than it was even to the people he was writing to. It's about this discernment this ability to filter our thoughts. And why? Because my thoughts about something or someone generate an attitude, and that attitude becomes an action. And so we have to be really careful about our thoughts because they eventually lead to actions, and our thoughts are being bombarded. Our thoughts can often run amok in our own heads. So let's look at what he tells them here. He says, always be full of joy. Again, this is like the repeating theme. He keeps like starting every next thing he talks about with this word joy. Always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. Let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. By the way, we could just stop and talk about that for hours probably, just being considerate. And he's almost a callback to what he talks about in chapter 2. Remember, the Lord is coming soon. Don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Now, this maybe sounds very token to a lot of people. Don't worry about anything, pray about everything, right? He was a missionary, he's a pastor, that's what he's supposed to say, right? Just tell people don't worry. Now, I want to say this, when he's talking about worry, and some translations maybe even use the word anxiety or don't be anxious, I do want to say that there are real issues with anxiety that people have. Okay, and medication is necessary and things to help balance you out. And I just want to say, it's not one of those things where I'm up here, I just want to say, well, just pray it away and then we're all good. He's talking about worries. These were general worries that were happening because of the culture they lived in, and a lot of these people were facing persecution just like he was himself. He's saying, don't worry about those things, begin to pray. But I do want to say this, if you've ever had someone, religious person, tell you that you just need to pray and not worry about that, don't go, I'm not saying that. Some of my closest friends have some real anxiety issues, and I do want to say that that's not what he's talking about here, and that you should go to the doctor, you should talk about those things, you should go to counseling if necessary, and you should work on those things. So I just want to kind of make that separation from what he's talking about here to the very real issues that people do have. So don't worry about anything. Instead, pray about everything. And then look what he says here. Tell God what you need and thank him for all he has done. So it's this idea of I'm going to tell God my needs, and I'm going to be grateful, and I'm going to talk about the things that I need. Not that I want, that I need. That's another separation I think is very important for all of us. He's saying tell God what you need, but then also be grateful for what he has done, for what you do have. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything that we can understand. His peace will guard your hearts and minds as you live in Christ Jesus. So I love this. It's not that his peace will guard your heart, peace will guard your heart and your mind. Have you ever seen those little memes that have the heart and the brain fighting? I have a friend who sends me those regularly in the email, and I love it. Why? Because our heart and our mind sometimes are at conflict with each other. Right? This thing that we want to do, but we know better, right? And it leads to this conflict that actually is an absence of peace. And he's saying that his peace will guard your hearts and your minds as you live in Christ Jesus. You follow Jesus, there's this peace that's going to guard both your heart and your mind. It's this idea that there needs to be peace in both of these things. And I think that they are absolutely 100% connected. But I would say this, that I think when we lose the battle with peace and joy being that sustained happiness, we lose it in our minds, in our thoughts. He continues, he says, and now, dear brothers and sisters, one final thing. Fix your thoughts, or focus. Now, he's going to give us this thing to focus on. Fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. I mean, wow. Right? This is real, what we call godly wisdom here that he's giving us as a way to protect our thoughts, to focus our minds. He says, keep putting into practice. So it's not just about what you think about. Again, your thoughts produce an attitude that generate an action. So now keep putting into practice all you learned and received from me. Everything you heard from me and saw me doing. Then the God of peace will be with you. So he's saying there's this life that you can live that leads to peace. Mental peace, peace in your heart, and peace in your mind. And I know that I am positive there are people in here today that is a very real struggle with you. I may even say it's probably most of us at some point in our life, maybe at certain seasons, where we hit this wall where there's just no peace, right? Our hearts and our minds are not on the same page. Our thoughts have run wild, and it has put our soul, the very core of who we are, at an unease and a lack of peace. So today I want to kind of help us with that, but then I know the real thing is going to be when we sit around the table and we talk about this. And this may not even be an easy conversation for a lot of us, but I think that real healing can begin. So here's what we're going to talk about, is this. Our thoughts generate the peace our hearts and minds need to experience joy. Our thoughts. This is where it begins. Right? This is where we tend to lose the battle, is in our minds. Whether it's filtering out the information and using wisdom and discernment in the things that are coming to us. Whether it's that inner voice, those inner thoughts that are destroying you, that are lying to you about who you are, or maybe who someone else is that you're very close to. Our thoughts generate the peace our hearts and minds need to experience joy. It's basically this. It's mindfulness. Mindfulness. Maybe some of you have heard this, and maybe if you do yoga or meditation of any kind of any sort, you've heard of this idea of mindfulness. And I think that there is a very Christ consciousness, the mind of Jesus that Paul tells another church to have that gets us here. It's a little different than the mindfulness. Mindfulness is often about being present to the moment, which is good, but I think it's even a step further is this. It's filtering outside influences through Christ-like wisdom, producing pure thoughts and actions. It's a filter. If you ever... So I remember my first apartment with my wife. It was a really nice apartment here in Las Vegas. We were really excited to get it. We kind of got an upgrade for free, and they kind of did everything, right? And so I just assumed that they were going to come in and change the air filter at some point, And so then a year later, we were moving, and we were like, oh yeah, we never changed the air filter. And that was one of the things like on the move out checklist thing. So we unscrew the thing. And it's like, because we'd never changed it. And this Vegas dust it's like a blanket, over our air thing. And I pull it down, and I'm just like, this is all the things that you don't want, right? Like that's what a filter is doing. It's is pulling up the air, and the filter is saying, all right, the good stuff we're going to let through, the bad stuff we're going to try, and we're going to capture, and we're going to take control of them, and we're not going to let them through. That's really what this mindfulness is. It's filtering these outside influences through Christ-like wisdom, which if you look at the things he says in Philippians 4:8 there, to think on these types of things, that's the wisdom producing pure thoughts and actions. How many of us in here would like to live a life that just flat out had more pure thoughts and actions than it already does? Me, right? Right? That would be good. That would be a good thing. We understand that. We want that. And so let's look at what it takes, I think, to generate that. So generating peace through right thinking. First, filter out worry. Filter out worry. And worry is just one of those things, again, that is the anxiety that comes up, this, I don't know about this, and I don't know about that, and the questioning and the worry. And worry, and I'll just say this, and here at Downtown Faith, we consider ourselves people of faith, right? And I think that ultimately, at some level, everyone is a person of faith. At some level, everyone's operating not knowing all of the answers, which is really what faith is. And worry is when we focus on the flip side of the coin of faith, which is uncertainty. Uncertainty is actually a beautiful thing. Uncertainty reminds us that we're not in control. It reminds us that all of life is an adventure. It reminds us that God is in control. And again, I know maybe even that word right there for some of us has like this thing happens inside of us when we talk about God or we use the word God. But the idea that something is bigger, something is out there, I talk to very few people who just flat out say, they may say, I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in that God that you're talking about, I don't believe in that God that they're talking about. But I have very few people that don't believe there is something out there, that there is this source, there is this thing, there are these things that I cannot explain in my human mind. And what he's saying here, I believe, when we begin to filter out worry, what we do is we relinquish control and faith and the uncertainty to God. That there is something bigger than us that is for our good. And I relinquish my life to that. And that's what he's telling these people, to filter out worry. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. Next, we want to focus on wisdom. When he gives these things that are true and that are right and that are honest and admirable, these things that are worthy of praise, they're excellent. And this becomes the focus of our mind. Now, I want to tell you something about this. This idea of focusing on wisdom. This requires time and effort, and I'll say this, intentionality. A few series ago, we talked about in our Hearing God series about intentionally finding time to be with ourselves in quiet and to listen. That is what that requires. Focus doesn't just happen, right? Come on, where are my parents in the house, right? You got kids, listen, focus doesn't just happen. You have to be intentional about it. You got to get up just a little bit earlier than they do, which is one of the hardest things in the world sometimes. Right? You got to say, I'm just going to go away. My wife and I, each of us, once a month, we do what's called a personal retreat. And that may not sound like a lot. That may not sound like enough. But once a month, we have a personal retreat. And I watch the kids, and she goes off by herself, and then she'll watch the kids, and I go off by myself. And these are these days that are so important to intentionally look at our lives and to focus our lives. And I'll say this, to focus our thoughts. To be able to look at our life thoughtfully, to filter out the outside influences, and to think about what is the wisdom that I should be living by? What is the right thing to be doing in and with my life? Focusing on wisdom, focusing on what is true, what is right, what is honorable, what is excellent, what is praiseworthy, what is noble. Focusing on those things. And I know when I talk about that, or maybe you hear it at your job or from someone else, you just think, I can't, that sounds great, but I can't do that. I just want to tell you, you can. You can take back your calendar and you can work with friends and family to make these times happen in your life. And I would say it's a necessity, especially if you're someone who's living by faith and following Jesus. Jesus modeled it for us. Paul encourages it for us. And I believe that generating peace through right thinking comes through not just filtering out the worry, but focusing on wisdom. And then lastly, following the way of Christ. He said, hey, you've seen me. You saw my life. You saw that I was like living what I'm talking about. I was living it out. Well, in the chapter right before, we find out, well, how was he living this out? It was through the power of Jesus. It was through the power of following the Christ, through following Jesus as leader and the Lord of his life, through living his life as though he were right next to Jesus and following after, replicating his teachings and his lifestyle. And he said, hey, you've seen me do those things, the God of peace will be with you. Paul's source, the source of his joy, of his right thinking, of his right living, came through Jesus. And that's, I follow Jesus. And again, there's other people who have maybe their source, or they have the right living, and you see their life and they could tell you where that comes from. For me, it comes through Jesus. That when I get things right, it is because I am pursuing Jesus and a Jesus life. And I believe that's what Paul was telling this church here. So filter out worry, focus on wisdom, and follow the way of the Christ. The things you saw in me do, and the things we know we saw Paul do, he was doing through Jesus. Our thoughts matter. They matter. Here's how much they matter. In his book, Tom Newberry, the 4-8 principle, where he looks at Philippians as a whole, he says this: the secret conversations you hold in the privacy of your own mind are shaping your destiny little by little. That's a huge statement, because I used to think I was the only one that had like conversations in my mind to myself like I do. I'm not. I just always wonder, do people call themselves by their first name when they're talking to themselves in their mind? I don't know. With every thought that races through your mind, you are continually reinventing yourself and your future. Research indicates that the average person thinks approximately 50,000 thoughts per day. Wrap your mind around that. 50,000 thoughts a day that are in some way shaping the way you view your life, the way you view yourself, the way you view your relationships. 50,000 thoughts a day that are shaping you as a person. This is either good or bad news, because every thought moves you either toward your God-given potential or away from it. No thoughts are neutral. So I just say, let's capture our thoughts. Let's filter our thoughts. Because our thoughts generate the peace our hearts and minds need to experience true joy. My hope is that when people come in here, maybe for the first time, when they come to Downtown Faith Gathering, when they show up at Pub Theology, and there's some people who follow Jesus together with Downtown Faith there, and any of our other gatherings, when they're around, when people experience Downtown Faith people, that they experience people who are full of joy. Not that their life is perfect, but their life is actually pretty hard, right? Because they're sacrificing, they're giving, they're living life to the fullest, they're living the adventure, and it's very difficult. But man, they're just full of joy. And I think to get there, we have to control our thoughts. We have to filter our thoughts. We have to think about our thoughts. To filter and focus and follow after Jesus.